Chapter 34. An Encounter with Natas. We do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. The Talmud. In the scanning place, time does not exist in the same way as it does within the human world. However, I need to complete my mission per time on Earth. As Lialeb and I walked toward Natas's office, I noticed the nameplate on the door and realized that Natas was Satan spelled backward. I had already met Iwe, the representation of all the gods of the darkness, and my teacher Lialeb captivated me. I asked myself how I would perceive Satan. Would he be an intellectual like Lialeb, or would he be more of a businessman, similar to Iwe? Very soon I would have my questions answered. We traveled through a wide hallway, and at the end of it there was an office that belonged to Natas. When we entered the room, Natas's secretary greeted us warmly and shook my hand as she said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Myra." Then she kissed my cheek and continued speaking. "I have heard that you're working on something important. My name is Analosi, and I am Natas's secretary." "It's a pleasure to meet you," I responded, somewhat amused. I didn't think that my mission would become known by so many people, and I was therefore flattered. "You may go right in. Natas is expecting you," Analosi said. Lialeb opened the door and we walked in. Natas approached us to say hello, and as he moved closer, he stopped at attention, lifted his arm high, and yelled, "Heil Hitler!" Lialeb laughed at Natas's joke, but I didn't know what to do. I decided to follow Lialeb's lead, and I laughed too. But truthfully, it was a nervous laugh. I silently appraised Natas, and I found myself very attracted to him, as he had the looks of a cultured aristocrat. Natas directed us to be seated, and with no more preamble he began to speak. "I have had great personal interest in meeting you, Myra, because, truthfully, your work is surpassing all our expectations." "Thanks a lot," I answered, as I felt very pleased by his recognition. "We wanted you to understand more about the darkness, more about us, and more about yourself. That is one of the reasons why we arranged this meeting. And so here we are. You can ask me anything you wish," Natas declared. At the time I was studying with Lialeb, and right before my trip to Hitler's world, I read that someone referred to the Holocaust and said, "After seeing everything that has happened, it is impossible to believe in the existence of a fair and almighty God." It could be that a fair or an almighty God does exist, but that God cannot be two things all at once, because if he is an almighty God, then he couldn't be any other but Satan. And if God were to be a fair God, then he would be a weak God, I stated. Natas and Lialeb laughed at my comment. "God as Satan?" asked Natas. "Yes, that's what I'm questioning," I responded. Remember the origin of everything. Before Genesis faced manipulation from people on the side of the light, she referred to the world as being created by Elohim, which is the plural of Eloah, Natas answered. "I don't understand, Natas," I interrupted. Lialeb continued with the explanation. "What Natas wants to tell you is that Elohim represents the 22 divinities, or the 22 original gods." "The 22 original gods?" I repeated. "Remember what you learned about Lucifer's rebellion?" Lialeb continued. "Originally, we used to be 74 cosmic entities altogether, and united we represented and formed the highest supreme being in the universe. You could say that we were 22. 2 plus 2 equals 4, divinities, plus 52, 5 plus 2 equals 7, angelic entities. These 22 divinities created 4 human races, and that is where the number 74, or 47, is derived. It is the numeral definition of God." And then what happened? I queried. Jehovah was also known as Yahweh, and he was one of those 22 divinities. He was probably the divinity with the most energetic concentration, and he had more major individual power than any of the other 21 divinities, because 7 angelic entities accompanied him. However, he had much less power compared to all the other divinities and the angelic entities together. At a determined point in time, during the evolution of the mortals, Jehovah decided to separate himself from our group, and he wanted to impose his vision about world evolution. Personally, Jehovah's selfish act bothered me a lot. The only thing that he accomplished was to create authentic enemies among all of us, and provoked what we could now call a war of the gods, Lilab explained. A war of the gods? I stated surprisingly. Yes. Some of the deities or divinities separated and formed their alliances. Others united with Jehovah, and instead of continuing the initial process for the evolution of the 4 races, the gods began to side with the different races or groups of people, giving status to an accentuated type of polytheism. What we tried to accomplish with our rebellion was to end all of those divisions. In turn, Jehovah did not want to know anything about us, and continued with his strategy by trying to influence and treat the mortals like children continuously. He referred to some of them as his people, the chosen ones, Datas clarified. Like children? I don't understand, I admitted. Jehovah's world is full of perverted things, like violence, aggression, and all sorts of punishments. Jehovah provoked universal flooding, and our question is, instead of exterminating everyone, why not let mortals evolve by allowing them to utilize their own free will? What was the real difference in the new emerging humans just after the flood? Jehovah sent the flood and wiped out children of all ages without giving them the possibility of evolving. Those children were not at fault for what their parents had done. So why didn't he allow those souls to utilize their own free will? Everything that I am telling you about is written in Genesis 1 of the Book of Light. It represents only part of Jehovah's violence. But what can you find out about me in the Bible? Very little. And of course whatever little you do find is very poorly documented, and at the same manipulated, Datas affirmed. You remain known as the Evil One, I interjected. Yes, and it also has been said that Satan moves around by dragging his body and feeds himself dust. Satan is also believed to be the cause of all evil and unfortunate acts which take place on earth. But why me? I've never done anything terrible to anyone, nor have I ever demanded that anyone do anything that they don't want to do. I believe in total free will. But I don't believe in a specific type of conditional free will. Human beings have the same kind of nature that we have. The original experiment consisted of seeing how and in what way nature would adapt to the human world. When all of the 22 divinities were together, we decided to create the 7 stages of evolution for the 4 races. We decided to provide human beings with certain positive and negative characteristics. In the beginning, the gods established that humans should possess 11 positive qualities and 11 negative qualities. As time passed by and with different reincarnation cycles, all human beings would acquire and experience all of the positive and negative qualities. Free will would be in charge of deciding which of these qualities would be the most powerful, and which qualities would have the most influence on human beings, Datas instructed. And what are those characteristics? I asked. Well, continued Datas, although some characteristics may have a lot in common, they can have different interpretations. I will tell you now that the negative features given to human beings are lust, avarice, aggressiveness, anger, jealousy, pride, evilness, cowardice, thievery, crime, and deceitfulness. The positive characteristics are thankfulness, friendship, kindness, goodness, discipline, discretion, generosity, justice, perseverance, courage, and hard work. All of these characteristics could be applied and understood in different ways, but these 22 characteristics comprise all human behavior. The first race that we developed was the ethereal, and at that time the bodies of human beings or animals did not exist. By not having human bodies, we were not able to experiment with any of the 22 characteristics I just described. In the beginning, as the light told men, there was a creation of 600,000 souls. These 600,000 souls were the energetic essence of the 22 divinities and the 52 angelic beings. We then took another step forward, and we created what we referred to as the teacher's race. Into this, still the ethereal race, we began to incorporate ourselves. The creators and all the souls created by us would then also include, gradually, each one of the master race. During the creation of the master race, problems among us began to surface. We had a divine essence, but once we came in contact with the physical world, we became contaminated, and this caused the inability to get used to that race. Moreover, some of the 22 positive and negative characteristics were beginning to surface. Each soul or energy acted differently. The less evolved powers were never able to adapt to their new situations completely, and that created significant adjustment problems. We had just begun to develop the animal kingdom, and we were in the phase of the creation of different species. The souls that we had created were wandering on Earth without physical bodies. They tried to adapt to the environment, but many of these souls were unconsciously going into the bodies of animals. When they returned to the origin of what we can call cosmic consciousness, they were already contaminated by these animal roots. It is precisely at this point that many of these souls entered the bodies of monkeys or other apes. However, coming into the monkey or ape's body was not programmed. We were creating and experimenting with our creation all at the same time. We didn't know what to expect, and whatever was going to happen was going to be a marvelous experiment. At the identical time of division and the passing and the sharing of our energy with those same beings, we were challenging ourselves. Eventually, those same beings could become as powerful as we were, and at any given moment in time, they could turn against us and destroy us, Natas explained. Is that what Bogomil and Mani were referring to? I wondered. In a way, they were able to understand a large part of that process. They understood part of the struggle between what is human and what is divine. Allow me to continue so that you might understand more clearly. Natas continued. That second race of masters continued to evolve, and that's how we arrived at the third phase, which is the phase of Lemuria. In this phase, the first inhabitants of Earth appear. But they were still not wholly human. The souls that had been wandering on Earth and the souls that had entered the animals came back to Earth, and they reincarnated as inhabitants of Lemuria. They were the androgynes, known as hermaphrodites. That means that they had functions of both sexes. They were not men, but they were also not women, since they had as much masculine energy as they had feminine energy. It was during this period that the final phase of the human being's evolution, as we know it today, began, Natas stated. So we human beings came from Lemuria? I asked. In a way, yes, as it was part of the original experiment. The second part of that experiment was going to be like the division of the sexes. The Lemurians were a race that liked to lead a quiet and spiritual life, since they remained connected to the divinities and the cosmic consciousness. It is here, with the separation of the sexes, that we go into the fourth phase of the evolution of the races. The fourth phase was called the Atlantis, comprising the species of Atlanteans. It is at that time and at that moment when the separation of Jehovah and the other divinities occurred. As I mentioned to you previously, Jehovah wanted to impose his criteria. The Lemurians and the Ethereals had visited Earth to experiment, and once there they became used to the physical pleasures. Genesis narrates this episode in chapter 6, verse 2. The children of Elohim, that is to say, the children of the gods, who were the angelic divinities of the first, second, and third phase of the evolution, saw that the daughters of those men were beautiful, and they decided to make them their wives. Genesis is telling you that two of nature's characteristics got mixed up. That is, the human and the divine attributes. This was the outcome of experiencing physical pleasure. These sexual relations gave origin to the new sub-races, and as a result, they were going to create human beings that we could classify as superhuman beings and supermen, extraordinary men who in turn would then give origin to the Atlantean race. That mixture between human beings and what is divine energy would bring about the great war of the gods. When Jehovah tried to impose his point of view, the process became a struggle or a combat of egos, and during this confrontation more than half of the divinities and more than half of the angelic beings united with Jehovah. It was then, with the energetic strength of their union, that they became stronger than us. The personal pleasures and then the uncontrolled scientific development, utilized for fighting and other efforts, caused a big war between these new human beings. Also, in this atomic war, the Lemurians and the Atlanteans destroyed themselves. The first experiment of human evolution ended in the fourth phase of the 7 steps. The remaining steps were unknown. Everything in creation had now been destroyed. The gods became enemies, and the evolution of these souls had become a total failure. Part of the effects of that war will remain forever, and will eventually limit the evolution of humanity. It was in that precise moment when a pact between the gods was entered into, just immediately before the 5th phase, Natas disclosed. "Why did they make this pact?" I asked curiously. The strength of the gods was divided among the souls. Tracing back to the origin of the evolution, the gods developed enormous egos, and unfortunately transmitted them to human beings. We then decided to continue to the 5th phase, referred to as the Egyptian phase, which is our current phase. As you already know, the light and the darkness are playing a game. The challenge for people is whether they choose to stay with the light or with us, the darkness. People's choice will affect the future of the evolution of humanity. After saying these words, Natas paused for a moment and then continued. It was at the beginning of this Egyptian phase when Jehovah, as explained in Genesis, created an initial pact of 490 years with the Jewish people. How you understand past occurrences have nothing to do with the reality of what happened. Now, what else would you like to know? Natas queried. And was it during that time of the evolution that you challenged Jehovah by tempting Eve with the apple? I asked.
I did not tempt Eve with the famous apple, as Eve followed her free will when she tasted the forbidden fruit. By disobeying Jehovah, she began to experience her life as a free human being. She was able to experiment, and as a result she made mistakes. Jehovah punished her, and along with punishing her, he punished the whole human race. Jehovah once again became involved in the original experiment that began with the 22 divinities, which brings us to our current conflicts. Why punish everyone for the mistake of only a few? Jehovah set the original experiment to the side. He united with an essential part of the divinities and the superior angelic deities. Although Jehovah continued to live in his world, little by little he lost his power, and the other gods that had joined him initially began to challenge him. Because of that, he began to suffer still more power. The more energy he lost, the angrier he became. He needed to sustain the alliance, which he supposedly had with Abraham. Recall that was a pact that originally lasted 490 years. That is to say, 70 times the number 7. And when that date came closer, Jehovah liberated his people from captivity in Egypt. So, what did he do to liberate them? He destroyed and massacred many human beings. He also sent them plagues, which he referred to as wonderful plagues. But didn't those plagues end the lives of thousands and thousands of innocent people? Moreover, to wrap up his mission, Jehovah terminated the whole army himself by making them drown in the rough ocean's waters. Also, they dare call all those despicable things free will or divine wishes? What kind of willfulness is that? Natas questioned. I understood that Natas wanted me to be open to his way of thinking and his logic, so I questioned him. What willfulness are you referring to? Laelib answered for him. What Natas wants to say is that Jehovah is one of us, and that he used all his power and his will as he pleased, when the original idea was to share that same power with all the souls. Jehovah knew the expressed and established wishes of the 22 divinities, because he was a vital part of them. However, Jehovah wanted to grow and to become more important than the other 21 divinities, and he was able to create conflict among all of us. With every single action that Jehovah took, there was a reaction from us that contributed to constant chaos on earth. That is the chaos which we have always lived in, and in which we shall continue to live. It is just as I explained to you when I told you the story of our rebellion. At the very beginning, we were 74 beings between the divine and the spiritual energies. Then the uprising of darkness came along, and we confronted Jehovah and his followers. That struggle has continued since then until today. The division and distribution of the 22 Egyptian tarot cards will bring us a winner in a new phase of evolution. The fight of 11 against 11 is going to take us to an end with irreversible consequences, and in one way or another it will put an end to the Egyptian evolutionary phase of humanity, Laelib said. And what will the next stage be? I asked. It would be the return to the initial stage, that is to say, the complete cycle to the union of all souls with the cosmic consciousness. It will result from the disappearance of the human being's ego, and it should come as a result of the withdrawal of the divinities' egos. The struggle among the gods has been nothing more than the expression of our egos, and the natural world is nothing more than a copy of the world in which the gods live. We are all confronting one another, and the struggle will only end with the victory of some and the defeat and enslavement of others. Then souls should come back to their original state of unity with other divinities and angelic beings. The problem is that when souls who are contaminated go back to the cosmic consciousness, they also contaminate us. This is the true reflection and terrifying image of everything that has been happening on Earth, dating back from the third phase of evolution to the present. Natas looked piercingly into my eyes, and he added, We will all get together at another time, and then I will explain some other issues. But for now, let's continue with Hitler. Tell me why you reincarnated into Hitler's body, I asked. Because the cards we received had to be played and maximized, and Hitler represented the ideal opportunity to help us establish our vision throughout the world. At the same time, it allowed evolution to continue freely toward that new phase of improvement, or towards its destruction, as it happened during the time of the Atlanteans, Natas continued. When your spirit was reincarnated into the body of Hitler, did you know that you were Satan? I asked. Laelib and Natas laughed at the same time. Why are you laughing? I questioned. Natas replied, That is an excellent question. When an angelic or a supernatural force enters the human body, it forgets a great part of its divine essence. There are times when you completely disconnect from that energy, and you need to go back to that same energy to find yourself again. As a result, I did not know that I was Satan until the very end of my incarnation. I had some sixth sense that told me that I had an assignment, but I wasn't sure what it was. At the time of my suicide, when I chose the time of my death, I chose to die exactly with the number 33. When I returned to this plane, then I understood. I went back to the scanning place, and I contemplated my life, living it as Adolf Hitler. Then I think that I was able to achieve a large portion of the objectives that I was looking for during my incarnation. "Did you have any doubts?" I inquired. "Doubts? Doubts about what? Death in itself doesn't exist. We all go back to the scanning place or the learning place, and back to the light or the darkness, feeling good about ourselves. Because even after natural death, life continues to exist," Natas clarified. I was hesitant and nervous as I asked, "Were you ever crazy?" Natas snickered as he responded, "No, I was never crazy. I was full of rage, and hate can turn into craziness. However, in the end, harboring hate is nothing more than a way of life. Think about it. Isn't the light full of hate as well?" "The light always talks about love," I noted. "Love and hate are not opposites," Natas stated. "I don't understand," I asked, surprised. "Imagine when you are on Earth and you love someone completely. Then one day the same person you have given your heart to begins to reject you and treats you hurtfully. What do you think would happen?" Natas asked. "Well, I think I would be angry with that person," I answered. "Yes, you could transform your love into toxic and destructive behavior, simply because you feel hurt and rejected by the person you have cherished and trusted with your love." "Do you think that situation might be possible?" Natas queried. "I suppose so," I replied. "Let me explain. Love and hate are nothing more than the same energy. They complement each other, and both of these energies go through continuous transformations. They are as transient as the clouds in the sky, constantly changing," Natas explained. "I've never thought about love and hate from that point of view," I said. "Now, what is radically opposed to love and hate is fear. Fear cannot share the same place with either love or hatred. Souls, during their life on Earth, are always afraid of loss. They are fearful of losing their loved ones, their belongings, their jobs, and their status. Humans attach to things and possessions that in reality do not exist, as anything materialistic is nothing more than a temporary adornment," Natas stated. He continued, "We come into the world with nothing, and when we die we leave with nothing, because our body has only been loaned to us for the duration of our lifetime. However, humans forget this, and they continuously form all kinds of attachments. When humans attach too tightly to what they desire the most, either materialistically or physically, then the possibility of losing it causes them significant suffering. Human beings become paralyzed by fear, and that fear interferes with their development. The light has always utilized that fear, and here, from the side of darkness, we try to liberate fear. Hatred can lead to craziness, even if it's not a legitimate form of craziness. Hitler lived alienated and sometimes paralyzed by fear, as he was afraid to lose what he had conquered. He was afraid of what could happen to the German people if he was defeated. However, Hitler was not crazy. Instead, he had a mission to carry out, and occasionally didn't understand how to attain what he needed. So he turned to black magic, astrology, and numerology. Hitler knew that this was necessary to compete. There was a task designed specifically for him, but he needed help to find his way, Natas concluded. But what influenced Hitler's life? I pondered. During your journey to the past, you were able to witness that Hitler was the product of hatred and fear toward the Jews. The followers of the light had manipulated that hatred and fear. For almost 2,000 years, many accused the Jews of killing Christ. They charged Jews of murdering the Creator, of killing God. Who could ever understand such a bizarre irrationality of killing God? How could anyone kill God? How could anyone kill the Creator? All that accumulated hatred gave Hitler his origin. People referred to Hitler as being diabolic, but Hitler was nothing more than the product of generated hatred by the followers of the light, who wanted bloody revenge for the death of their Redeemer. Natas paused and then continued. Yes, it is a fact that Hitler caused the death of 6 million Jews. However, how many millions of people did Stalin kill? No one talks about Stalin, but everyone still talks about me. Stalin killed more than 20 million of his people, and he was also an anti-Semite. Anti-Semitism was created by Jehovah, along with the story of the chosen people. He selected those people, but not with the other 21 divinities, Natas explained. Who was Stalin's reincarnation? I asked. Stalin was Rephasul, better known as Lucifer, and present here as part of Iwe, Natas admitted. Does Lucifer have more power than the 21 divinities altogether? Of course he is not more powerful than the power of the 21 divinities combined, but the 21 divinities no longer exist. During the different alliances formed between the divinities and the angelic beings, the current panorama is different than it was at the beginning. What I can tell you now is that at an individual level, Lucifer is much stronger than some of the original divinities. Moreover, throughout time, he has captured and attracted many beings and energies, both human and angelic. Lucifer is very compelling, and now he's creating vast confusion on Earth. He was behind the London attacks that took place on July 7th, 2005, which numerically is a 777, a 777, which was very much to the liking of Lucifer. He will continue to give the Earth a great deal to discuss. However, now let's turn back to Hitler. Natas continued. Hitler was one of the last cards assigned to darkness, and through him and all his works, we thought about accelerating the creative and destructive processes in all humanity. It's like the image that the Hindu people present to us about the Shiva god, one of the original 74 creators. He is the destructor of the universe, but at the same time he is the creator and the transformer of that same universe through a process called destruction. Ancient primitive groups made sacrifices to the gods to appease their anger, and Hitler did the same, but he sacrificed human beings. His technique was different, but the means were the same. Keep in mind that Shiva's ultimate reality is nothing more than happiness and the ecstasies to which human beings eventually succumb. Destruction is transformation. For the Shivan believers, he is beyond any description, manifestation, or limitation imaginable in form, time, and space. Then isn't it true that in one way or another, Hitler was after the same thing? Couldn't Hitler have been the reincarnation of that same Shiva? Couldn't I have been that same Shiva? Any way you look at it, or any way you analyze it, Hitler was nothing more than the being or the entity who facilitated the process through which all the accumulated hatred of the centuries formed, and finally manifested in a disastrous manner. Once someone defined me in a very ascertained way because he said that I had been acting as a midwife in charge of bringing a big monster to Earth. But the only thing that I brought to the human world was something that had already been under gestation in that same earthly world throughout the years. If it hadn't been me, it would have been someone else. But that irrational and irresistible process which transforms hatred into vengeance would have taken place, one way or another, Natas said. But that process which you refer to as a regenerative process could have been another shape or another kind of existence if Hitler hadn't existed, I wondered. That is something we will never know, Natas responded. Humans are conditioned to look for excuses and solutions for what has already happened once it's too late to change it. The hatred accumulated throughout the years always ends up imposing itself on any levels of rationalization, which shows us that the negative characteristics of humans are much stronger and predominant than the positive qualities, Natas answered. What do you believe that you represented when you were Hitler? I asked. I took on a unique position, and sometimes people do not understand my function or what I represented. I assumed my responsibility because that role, in one way or another, was destined to be represented by someone like myself. That part had to be characterized by someone who could understand the current world in its present dimension, and to be willing to reinterpret the meaning of the story, Natas explained. I'm lost, I noted. Allow me to explain to you so that you can understand and so that you will have no doubts about the role that each of us has represented in that sham. I call it a sham because that's what it is, nothing more than a sham. More than some 2,000 years ago, Christ incarnated himself on earth, and he was one of the 22 original divinities. From the beginning, Christ was always very close to Jehovah. They grew stronger together, and later Christ incarnated on earth. There was a period when they were both extremely attached, and that is what the evangelists try to explain in the symbolic way that the Father sent his Son to earth. Christ arrived in the world of the mortals, and he wanted to extend the original pact between Jehovah and Abraham beyond the Jewish people. In a way, Christ meant the beginning of the end of the Jewish historical prominence, and therefore the arrival of Christ on earth inevitably brought about the end of the Jewish state. The end of Herod represented the partition of the old Jewish kingdom in thirds. Some years later, the land of Israel went on to become part of the Roman Empire, and Jerusalem was no longer Jewish, but Roman, although many Jews still lived there, Natas affirmed. Do you mean to say that the arrival of Christ represented the end of Judaism? I inquired. The arrival of Christ meant the transformation of Judaism to something new and different. It was no longer the traditional Judaism because many of the Jews had accepted Christ as the Messiah, and they had converted to Christianity. However, other Jews did not convert to Christianity, and those Jews that did not convert to Christians were never able to have their own country again, until the time I arrived and handed it back to them, Natas said. So that is why you came back to earth, so that you could give the land of Israel back to them? I asked, surprised. Some years after the crucifixion of Christ, a great Jewish rebellion took place against the Romans. This rebellion lasted from the year 66 A.D. to the year 74 A.D. I imagine that you already understand the meaning of those two numbers, Natas declared. Yes, I understand, I confirmed. During this rebellion, thousands of Jews faced execution, and many of them received crucifixion. So after this rebellion, it was established that Israel no longer belonged to the Jews, and instead it belonged to the crucifixions, and executions were nothing to the Romans. Those were more than an anticipation of what would happen almost 2,000 years later, and become known as the Holocaust. In the year 132, 66 years after the first rebellion, the Jews began another uprising against the Romans. This time it was against the Roman Emperor Hadrian. Once more they were heavily reprimanded. However, this time, to avoid future rebellions, the Jews were expelled from Jerusalem for good. Moreover, from this point on, the Jews could not return to Jerusalem. Now pay close attention to the number combination of 1 plus 3 plus 2 equals 6, and 66 years later, we have the combination of 666. Well, to continue. After Rome converted into the Christian religion in the year 325, the Christians did not revoke the Roman proclamation, and the Jews were still unable to go back to Jerusalem. It was not until the arrival of Islam when the Jews were allowed to go back to Jerusalem. They never returned to have their state, but only after the Holocaust. On earth, people continue to question whether or not Christ was a Messiah. And the most common response to that question is that Christ was the Messiah to the Christians, but he was never the Messiah for those who continued with Judaism, Natas said. So then, what is the Messiah? I asked. Throughout the centuries, the Christians have waited and continued to wait for the second arrival of the Messiah, while the Jews continued to wait for the first arrival of the Messiah. I tried to make them both happy and converted myself into the Messiah that the Christians and the Jews longed for, Natas advised. I don't understand, Natas, I interrupted in disbelief. You are the Messiah? If you analyze my function, you would understand me better. The Christians needed the second arrival of the Messiah, which would bring about the redemption and the glory. However, for that Messiah to return to earth, according to their prophecies, they needed the existence of the state of Israel. So I accelerated the birth of the state of Israel, since it came about as a final result of the Holocaust. Without the Holocaust, the state of Israel would have never existed, and without the existence of the state of Israel, the Messiah could never come back. So, you see, I killed two birds with one stone. I was able to make the birth of the state of Israel possible, and at the same time also made the second arrival of the Messiah possible, Natas carefully explained. But why do you say that the state of Israel never existed, as the Bible and Roman chronicles reflect it? I asked. That was many thousands of years ago. Many thousands of years ago, many things existed that don't exist now. Imagine if all those people and countries wanted to restore their place in history now. Those countries do not exist anymore, in the very same way that many civilizations existed in the past, but will never exist again. One may say that I was in charge of bringing good through immense pain and blood, and restored what appeared lost for thousands of years, Natas declared. But why do Christians need the existence of the state of Israel? I asked. So that their prophecies can come true. People still believe in prophecies that have never existed or that have no real basis. Judaism has had a very significant development throughout history, as it is nothing more than a religion. But because of the way it's been expressed, transmitted, and loved throughout the past, it is thought of as some race instead of a religion, Natas revealed. But you always talked about the Jewish race when you used to be Hitler, I exclaimed. Yes, that is true, but the only thing I did was to interpret the feeling of the people, and the Roman Catholics agreed to it. First they capitulated and helped me obtain power in 1933. Later I signed a concordant with the Vatican, which allowed me to carry out my mission without them bothering me. It was all based on the perception of the Jewish race, and not necessarily on religion. Remember that there are 4 races, and the Jews are not a race in itself, but a religion. Gypsies are a sub-race, and I finished off as many of them as I was able to. There was nothing personal about it, only that the whole world also hated them. However, we had to begin somewhere, and that was easy. No one stood up for the Gypsies and raised their voices in protest. Even now, many people still hate Gypsies, for no valid reason. The only thing I did was to exploit and to loosen up the hatred that had been accumulating against the Jews throughout the centuries, Natas told me. It has also been said that you were the Antichrist, I stated. The Antichrist, the beast, and the number 666. All these are concepts that have been misinterpreted and manipulated. One could say that I was a fake Messiah for the Christians. But at the time I was being a fake Messiah, I was becoming an authentic Messiah. All those ideas about the Messiah and the Antichrist do not have a significant concrete meaning, and they are inexplicable. The Antichrist is an extremely controversial concept, and therefore it is explicable in many different ways. It could have many different meanings and an undermined number of applications. But in the end, the only true thing and the only thing that we have are the results, Natas said.
And what are those results? I asked.
Human beings walk toward their destruction. The negative characteristics of human nature within the realm of humanity's life on Earth represents a consistent way of getting away from the positive qualities of human beings. As a result, human beings fixate solely only on their survival. To attain peace on Earth, first we have to fight for it. People on Earth easily believe big lies, and they think they're smart because they don't understand the little lies. Victory moves masses of people, and not by truth. People do not like to, and they also don't wish to fight. What I did, and what I left on Earth as a legacy, presently works better than ever. In all the countries of the world, decisions are not made based on what the majority of the people want. Instead, decisions are being made by a few who are considered to be the most capable. However, those who can understand the meaning of life, in one way or another, are much closer to me. I control the world of mortals, and I manage all the power that people exercise on Earth. Those people considered to be capable of only provoking wars and causing suffering for their benefit and the benefits of their friends and colleagues. Those people are the best example of what human nature represents in its highest essence, the essence of power for personal gain. The continuous struggle and the inevitable do not represent more than life itself and the reality of all things. The human race could not exist unless there is a continuous struggle, and without struggling for life, one could never be born to that life. Life cannot exist without a struggle. Any objective that humanity could obtain is always based on the originality utilized to achieve that objective, and in the brutality and violence generated to attain that objective. Remember that nothing on earth can be obtained by just asking God for it. One has to struggle to get it. The real defense to humanity lies in the attack of humanity. It is a constant fight. It is a fight for life, and is a struggle for triumph. Here in the dark realm we will never be defeated, because before we are defeated, we will bring down humanity along with us. We have our people prepared for the final assault. They control all of it, and very soon we will have accomplished a new kind of humanity, a real, ruthless, and kind of humanity that will end up dying to be reborn again from its ashes. Myra, remember the commandment that you brought to the darkness. The truth does not matter. The only thing that matters is victory, Natas firmly declared. Lileb convened that our meeting was over, so I got up to leave, and Natas looked at me resolutely as we said goodbye. He had adopted one of Hitler's gestures. We were on our way out when suddenly Natas called to me, "Myra." I turned around and looked at him. "Yes?" I questioned. "When you visited Hitler's Germany, there came the point in your trip when I heard you say that you felt as though everything was very familiar. Exactly what was it that you sensed?" Natas asked me. "I experienced some déjà vu, as if I'd been there before, and I'd already lived those same moments," I responded. "You were there, and you did live those moments," Natas informed me. Just as I heard those words, I was aware that something was very wrong. I had the uncomfortable feeling that I was about to hear something that I would rather not have to listen to, but still I had to ask. Who was I within that story? "You were the soul who gave life to Jelly Rabal," Natas admitted, as he looked at me affectionately. "Do you mean to say that I was Hitler's lover?" I asked in disbelief. "Yes, you were the niece and the lover of Adolf Hitler. which means you were my lover, and you were also my beloved. And now I can tell you I loved you more fervently than I have ever loved anyone else," Natas confessed. "But is Satan capable of love?" I wondered. "At the time when we reincarnate as human beings, we live and feel like those human beings. We are capable of feeling love and feeling hate very intensely, as mortals do. After killing yourself, you came back to the scanning place. You were not capable of freeing yourself from the shadows, and for a long time you were not able to forgive yourself about your experience. Remember that all mortal and divine beings have to settle their accounts. You mustn't think you are exempt and that you can escape paying back the debts which you still have on earth. But here you are free," Natas disclosed. "I feel that one way or another I'm the heiress of a long guilty past. The physical forms which I have been adopting throughout my reincarnations have not been the exit doors from the hell that I have created for myself. Instead, those same lives have represented the entry or re-entry to that same hell," I affirmed. "That's the way it is, Myra. Now I'm here in front of you, invisible. But remember that I've always been at your side, although you never saw me. Moreover, I will be next to you always. In some mystical way you have created me, and you have also transformed me. You are part of my essence, and I can see that you have an unusual attraction for darkness's divinities," Natas concluded as he hugged me and smiled at Lialeb. Lialeb smiled back at Natas, knowingly, as if they shared a secret, and then he said to me, "Let's go." Lialeb and I left the office, and we walked back toward one of the study rooms located within the scanning place. I needed sufficient time alone to digest everything that had happened during my encounter with Natas. The unexpected thing was the realization that I had been Adolf Hitler's lover, and that I had an undeniable magnetic attraction toward Natas. There was no doubt in my mind that things would become more intriguing and complex as time went on.